and trying to understand what this beast was and how I was going to use it and what it was, where it was going to work. And I think the very first experience for me was getting onto this open source product and downloading software and some demos, and then running the demo and just watching a message go from this screen to that screen, and then that was it. I was going, okay, so like, where is it? How's it going to work? And I think today's session is going to be deeper than that. It's going to be, let's create a message, let's move the message across from one point to the other, and let's put that content into a database. Let's have that content fail and look and see what we do and how we handle failures, and then let's look at another way of using it, and then we'll talk a little bit more about NServiceBus and what it is. Right, so kicking off NServiceBus, we're going to quickly talk about scalable distributed systems. When you start using service buses, these are generally, you're going to be working in this concept of a scalable distributed system or some form of distributed system. And in distributed systems, you've got a system that's sitting remotely from the original piece of software that you're actually, you've got these clients that are now going to need to go in and pull something. Now this generally, as we've written in most of our solutions, has been solutions that live inside your organization. All right, so they could be something that you've made available as a separate process or a separate data. If you think about SOA in its purest form, it's tech agnostic, and if you have a look at that DVD, you'll see one of the systems that I talk about that we've written in the early 90s or the late 90s was running on FTP, and it had a file transfer, and it was common delimited or part delimited data that was going from one place to the other. It was still a SOA solution. And people look at it and go, yeah, it's not looking that great, but it's still so. So the one thing I want you to try and uncouple, because I think people in the mid 2000s came up with this concept, or hitched onto this theme of SOA, and decided that we're going to make everything SOA. So BizTalk became SOA, and it's not really, BizTalk's not a SOA engine, it's actually an integration engine. And there's a large number of different things that people just went, it's SOA. And I just want you guys to understand that SOA is a concept, it's an architectural pattern rather than it's a piece of technology. All right, so it's important just to get that. We are going to work specifically with technology today, so you guys will kind of go, well, we are going to work with tech, so why bring it up? But it is something important to bear in mind. So NServiceBus, and why am I pushing for NServiceBus? I think the important aspect is that we need to understand is that when you start getting into these scalable systems, you're going to need something that's robust and then something that's reliable. And over the years of working with the system, having met the person who wrote the system and started to gain a love for the software, I've actually realized that it's actually exceptionally powerful, and it's very, very strong, and it's very easy to use. And so it's become a very handy tool kit in what we can do. I've put this up because I want to just show you just a bit of a time. I'm not going to show you, but to talk about a timeline of the software company. The product started, now that could be to a database, it could be to a file, and in this particular case, it's actually just going into MSMQ, which is just a very fancy way of serializing information and then running them over some sort of DTC transaction. But you could also put them into other types of queuing technologies. But think about the bus as just some way of taking some kind of message, being able to serialize it and persist it. Okay, some persistence mechanism. And then for other pieces of software to be able to pick up those messages and then deal with them in the way they want to deal with them. Right, every single NServiceBus application has some form of requester or some sort of command or some sort of application that basically creates some message, and we'll talk about how you create that message, and puts it onto the bus and then forgets about it. Doesn't worry about what's going to happen. And we also have sent to every application a service host, which would be able to listen on the other endpoint of the bus. And when I say endpoint, I mean, you would think about it traveling along a bus. It doesn't actually, it actually just goes into a bucket. And we put a message in the bucket, and somebody else is fishing around going, I deal with this, and then takes that message and then works with it. So we would have the service host, which is the software that would look at picking up the information. And this service host
is a very interesting pattern. So if you go and have a look at some of the SOAP patterns that are out there, service host is actually what we call a proper pattern, and it's defined by saying it's a piece of software that is able to start up and configure itself, generally by reflection, to find out what messages it's going to be looking for and what buses it needs to be able to interact with. All right, so we will have a look at NServiceBus and how it actually does it, but with NServiceBus, there's very little configuration. There's a large amount of reflection on the DLLs that you're going to create, and we'll look at them and interrogate them and decide how best it's going to work with that information. Transaction or the other type of technology, and if something along the way fails, we have a lock on the database structure's changed, the database is down, I don't know, the web service point is down. If any one of those actions fails, it will roll all the transactions that you've done already back again. Now, in a very complex system, that's a very powerful feature to have, because you're never sure what parts of the system you've actually touched and what parts of the system you haven't touched. So there's that way to solve the problem, which is the elegant way, and then there's the slightly not so elegant way, but sometimes you don't have a choice because your tech doesn't give it to you, is what we call the compensating transaction. So the compensating transaction really means I'll go and have a look at what's already happened. I should have inserted here, I should have done this, I should have done that, and I will try and undo what I've already done. Now, can you imagine, once we start getting into this, how complex an undo code would actually be? And for me, that really brings into play a whole slew of other problems, because if you need to now start testing code, your test cases have just gone up exponentially because of the number of data points you'd need to remember, or points that you would need, a failure you would need to be able to test for. And so for me, as a test-centric person, I don't want to be writing lots of compensating transaction tests. Make no mistake, sometimes you have to do it, but I'd really be looking for technology that gives it to me. So that's one of the reasons why NServiceBus for me is an exceptionally powerful product. Well, and then inside the transaction scope will be the service handler. The service handler is really just some piece of code that would manage what I'm actually doing. It will run the connections to the database, write this, do this, send messages to another queue, send them off again.